Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Sophie Glovier. I'm the Chief of Strategy and Program at the Watershed Institute. We're in the home stretch now of the conference, and I'm very glad to welcome you to our session, Navigating Watershed Conservation Amidst Climate Change, the Resist, Accept, Direct, and for short, RAD framework. There are a few slides here, which I think you have seen before, but I'm just going to go through them to be thorough, except for maybe I can advance this way. Thank you very much to all of our sponsors. We've started the session now. I hope that everyone in the Zoom world can hear us. In the room, please silence all your devices. And when we do Q&A, we'll hand the microphone around so that people in the virtual space can hear us. For those of you in the virtual world, this is going to be somewhat of an interactive session. And so when we get to that part, we will give you some instructions for that. And I am going to read our speaker's bio. I am here with John Wager, who is the Deputy Executive Director of Operations and Sustainability at Duke Farms. There, he is responsible, he serves as a key leader overseeing natural resource management, sustainable agriculture, facilities, landscaping, budgeting, technology, and public safety for the organization. He also teaches environmental studies and climate change courses at Raritan Valley Community College as an adjunct assistant professor. Previously, he worked in land acquisition and stewardship roles at Conservation Resources, New Jersey Conservation Foundation, and Schiff Natural Lands Trust. He earned his biology degree from Richard Stockton University and Master of Forestry degree from Yale School of the Environment. He was also a Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala, focused on sustainable agriculture and environmental conservation. Please join me in welcoming John.
Thank you, Sophie. And thank you to the Watershed. This conference is great. I hope you all are having a great time. I know this is the last workshop of the day. So I tried to make it as interactive as possible. So I'm going to need you to all kind of participate to make this great. So as Sophie said, I am Deputy Executive Director of Duke Farms for Operations and Sustainability. Duke Farms, we're center of the Doris Duke Foundation. So I work for the Doris Duke Foundation. And the Doris Duke Foundation really focuses on creativity in the arts, health and well-being, and the environment. At Duke Farms, we sort of have three strategic pillars that we focus on. One is restoring ecosystems and ecosystem services. The other one is demonstrating solutions to climate change, both in the built environment and natural climate solutions. And the third one is engage. So we have a really nice place where we get about 150,000, 200,000 visitors a year. Plus, we do all kinds of conferences and things. So I work for the center, Duke Farms. In Doris Duke Foundation, we have another center in Hawaii called Shangri-La, and we have 5 national grant-making programs related to creativity in the arts, health and well-being, and the environment. So it's a pleasure to be here today to talk about RAD, and I'll talk a little bit how I came to this and how it really helped me sort of intellectually frame a lot of our work that we do in Duke Farms as it relates to natural resource management. But first, I wanted to take kind of a step back. And again, this is the interactive part. You're going to have to talk to your neighbor. And I want you all to think about a time that you've experienced an unexpected change and how you reacted to it. It could be professionally, that's probably best, right? Or personally. And I want you to just talk with your neighbor about that change for 2 or 3 minutes. You folks on Zoom can just, chat.
They can't chat with each other, but they can input into the Q&A.
Input into the Q&A. Yeah. So sort of how you've adapted to that change. It could be anything. And you'll see why I'm asking this, because we're going to be talking about this in a watershed and natural resource standpoint in a second. So 5 minutes, maybe a little fewer. If you could talk to your neighbors, talk about a change, professional change, project didn't go well, whatever, and you did something or you didn't do something. So Yes.
World
Okay.
can hear. Yeah.
And
Who wants-
this is a microphone too,
Okay.
right? So
Yeah.
I
So
I'll
who
use this one.
would like to share?
I'd like to share sudden change and how you
Alison,
adapt.
you want to share? I know you want to share.
Oh, okay. What I was talking about was the presence of beach leaf disease on our property on the Watershed
cool.
Reserve.
Ecological one,
So,
good.
yeah, so like what we found it this past summer. And me and my interns looked out there and like, oh, here it is. So it had turned into the research that we are trying to do, impossible methods of implementation. Also, where are all the beach dominant areas on the reserve? So a lot of resource gathering adventures have been happening this past year. And so now looking into possible methods of implementation,
Excellent. What kind of implementation?
possibly treatments for the trees,
Okay.
and then within a budget, trying to figure
Okay.
out what is the biggest bang for our buck to
Gotcha.
treat and then
Right.
have as much as the beach
So you're
population.
trying to kind of resist this disease from taking over most of your beach trees.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That was an awesome one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Doesn't have to be ecological, although that was a good one to start off with. Anyone else want to share? Does anyone on Zoom want to share?
Anyone on Zoom? I'm looking. No one on Zoom yet.
Okay. Well, at least you got to know your neighbor. Okay, go ahead.
I didn't get his name.
Okay.
But it turns out we both have retired.
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah.
We both had, I'm sorry. We both had very challenging jobs. I can hear it. Huh? I'll speak loud. We both had very challenging jobs at work, which really made our minds work. And it's almost addictive to be having a job like that. So when you retire, all of a sudden that stimulus disappears. And so each of us in different ways found our stimulus again. This gentleman started taking auditing courses at Princeton, and I went back to DEP part-time with challenging projects. I do more than just take pictures. And so both of us dealt with that change
That's great.
pretty effectively, I thought.
So you directed that, you sort of directed yourself into this other sort of, not career, but, path of doing stuff, right? Like, yeah, so that's great. So, and you'll see why I'm talking about this. So, when we're thinking about change, and we're thinking about what's happening ecologically and with climate change. So you think about like overabundant white-tailed deer, non-native invasive species, Asiatic earthworms. In watershed situation, you have a lot of development, impervious coverage, habitat loss. Some of it obviously is related to, then you have climate change kind of exasperating all of this. It can become overwhelming, right? And so that's why this framework called the RAD framework I found so helpful. And what RAD stands for, it stands for resist, which when you're trying to maintain current conditions. So I think that's along the lines you were talking about. So you're resisting this disease that's affecting beach trees. Accepting, so there's certain changes that you need to accept, and we'll talk about that in a second. Like there's certain things you can think about, certain ecosystem changes on the landscape that we don't have enough money to deal with, right? And that was a relief to me to learn about accept, because I was like, I'm looking at Duke Farms and some of the ecological issues we have, and sort of limited resources to deal with it, and sort of conceptualizing things as accept as I think healthy, and we need to, unfortunately or fortunately, where you have to accept that these ecosystem changes are going to be happening, and that we can't really put a lot of resources into them happening. It's going to be a different future state. And then there's the direct, which is the one that's a little harder in RAD. So it's resist, accept, and direct. And direct is where you're directing it into a different state. So it's like you all, right? You're directing yourselves into a different path to, Or, for example, let's say, you're doing a restoration project, you're looking at more southern species, like assisted migration. So that's the sort of thing that tends to be, and we'll talk about more examples of it, a little more controversial. So you're looking at what a potential future state might be in your watershed, and you're saying, how do we help accelerate or help push this future state? So, things you might be thinking of is when you're thinking about rewilding, right? Are you thinking about more southern species, right? Are you thinking about southern genotypes of plants? So this is, this is again, some of the issues with climate change. So you have all these ecological factors and you're all very aware of this and probably heard this in a few workshops today of the issues that we're facing, right? Temperatures are climbing, sea levels rising, wildfires are, becoming more common even in areas where we didn't have wildfires before, right? Or the return interval was much higher. There's a lot at stake in New Jersey. So this is where kind of I came in. So there were staffing changes at Duke Farms about a year and a half ago. And my job primarily for the past 10 years has been really in sustainability and the built environment at Duke Farms and all the operations. So all the visitor stuff, safety and security, and the buildings. I love the buildings. I could talk forever about buildings and, heat pumps and solar with battery energy storage. But but they said, hey, we need you just to, temporarily review our natural resources program, our stewardship program, and figure out sort of a way forward. It was an opportunity to kind of, take a step back and look at the work we had done over the past 20 years. And so we have this awesome stewardship plan. And if you want a copy of it, you can, there's a QR code there. And it's about 300 pages long. And it had so many things in it as far as how to address overabundant deer, how to address non-native invasive species, how to address soil erosion, how to do sustainable farming. The one thing it didn't have was anything about climate change or an acknowledgement of rapid ecological change. And it was done in 2017, which was interesting. Now, it does have some things about climate change. It was all about like greening, like weed whackers and stuff. So it didn't really talk about the framework for how you address it in ecological management. And so I was struggling with this. And I was like, it's an awesome plan, but there's no way we can implement everything in here. And it doesn't have this like overarching framework for looking at rapid ecological change. I was talking to my friend who works up at Acadia National Park and works with these folks who developed this concept called RAD. And he said, hey, did you ever hear about RAD? And he sent me this paper and I was like, oh my gosh, that's it. That's how we can kind of contextualize and frame the type of management that we're doing. So what is RAD? So I talked about it a little bit before, but it's about this approach, this framework. So you have resist, right? So in resist, what you're doing, the R in RAD, is you're working to maintain or restore the function. You're basically resisting that change. You want things the way they are. And this is what the National Park Service used to do. And this is why they were stuck. This is why they developed this thing, right? Like we're preserving Yosemite or Yellowstone or Zion, and we're going to resist all outside change. But they knew that, even the National Park Service with its resources in the past, I don't know about now, if they have any resources, but in the past, they tried to just resist change, and they needed a bigger framework because they realized some of these ecological changes were just going to happen, right, with climate change and other things. So they came up with this RAD approach, and then there's the resist, there's the accept, which is allowing ecosystem processes to go on. You can think about, I think 95% of our open space probably is in this accept category, right, where we're just sort of leaving it be, for better or for worse, but maybe for resource constraints issues. But you're letting it drift and function the way it just sort of would, naturally. And then there's direct, where you're actively shaping ecosystem process, function, and structure or composition to a new ecosystem type. So when you're thinking about RAD, the accept is intensity of intervention and deviation from historic conditions, right? So you could also say cost here. I think it's the same thing. But you see resist up at top here as being very costly and you're not deviating from the historic condition of this ecosystem or of this watershed. Whereas direct, you're accepting that there's rapid ecological change, and it can be a pretty big deviation from what there was historically. And I think this is between resist and direct, there's a lot of kind of philosophical controversy, right? And it's something that we all just have to deal with because, you know, we're all just kind of accepting. So this is sort of the default. This is impossible. So where are we going to go, right? So it's impossible to resist everything. It's impossible even for, you know, Duke Farms and the resources we have to be able to implement that great plan. And so do we accept or we direct, and then how do we sort of make those decisions? So let's take a practical example here. So does anyone know what this, can anyone describe this picture for me real quick? Right. And what would that be caused by? Because of, yeah, flooding, like, yeah, maybe impervious coverage, increasing sort of flashiness of streams or whatever. So what would be an example in this, someone wants to raise your hand, of resist? Like, what would you do to resist this change? What's it, build a retaining wall? Okay, yeah, just harden it, right? Any other resist sort of ideas? I think that might be the main one, right? Accept, what would you do to accept it? What 90% of these is happening, right? Just kind of leave it be. And then what about direct? Riparian buffers, yeah. Anything else for directing to a new state? Yeah. Basically, yeah, cut it back so that it would. Right. Right. And I think it's important in those how you're modeling it to understand if you're directing it, what the future which you would do, right, as an engineer or whatever. But yeah, so that would be an example of direct. And maybe you would plant more southern species there, right? So you're directing it to this new ecosystem type. All right. What about this? Okay, what's going on here? Who can tell me what's going on here? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Marls, Rose, Barberry, Privet, yeah, it's Barberry, I think mostly, but yeah, it could be any of those. So what would you do to resist this?
John, will you just repeat the answers and then everybody will be able to hear?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just repeat. If somebody answers, you
repeat.
just repeat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. So the answers were multiflora rose in the understory, and it's actually barberry mostly, but it could be anything, and it's all invasive. So it's invasive understory with native overstory, no forest regeneration. Although I'm not sure if this forest, it probably should be. It looks a little open. So what would you do, right? So what would you do to resist this? Any ideas? Anyone done it?
Disclosure.
Yeah, deer exclosure. That's resisting the overabundant deer, which are likely the reason why you have so many invasives here, because the deer aren't eating the invasives and they're eating the natives. Anything else of resisting? Yeah.
Tear it all out.
Tear it all out. Yep, that's resisting. Yep. Anything else? So that's expensive, right, on that chart? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's you know, it's part of all of this, I think, the education part, definitely. Does anyone have any ideas how that could fall into, like, what that would be as far as resistance? I think if you're doing homeowner education, you have to tell them like what to do, right? Like, you're telling them not to plant, but if they have this condition already, the education may be pulling it out or whatever. So
policies about not selling non.
yeah, totally. Yeah. Right.
Species.
Yeah. And that's getting to the heart of the problem. So you wouldn't even have this problem, right? So you don't even deal with RAD if these species didn't exist. So, okay. So So that's resist, accept, you would just accept this. I think this is what we're all doing, right? Most of our properties are accepting it. In Duke Farms, we're accepting it, right? When I've heard about accept, I was like, wow, this is great. And then direct, what would we do to direct this? I think, Sophie, like your answer is probably a direct, like put up a fence, but then what else would you do to direct this? What's that?
Native plant.
Yeah, probably replanting. And again, maybe thinking about the species composition of those plants, right? This looks like, yeah, I don't know what it is. I mean, it looks like there's some white pine in there, maybe. I can't tell necessarily by the bark. Maybe that's a birch. I don't know. But yeah, so think deliberately about what kind of forest you want here in the future. What's going to be the most resilient? Would you plant ash trees? Probably not. Would you plant beech trees? Unfortunately not, right? But maybe you'll plant more white oaks, or things that you think are resistant to the climate. Maybe you'd plant more southern species of white oaks, right? Okay, here's one. So this was at Duke Farms during Hurricane Ida. And this is one of our gates on River Road. So how do you resist this in RAD, R for resist? Any ideas? Yeah, I mean, there's just no way, right? I mean, I guess if you had enough money, you could, yeah, right, right. So that's resisting, right? And that's a real, I mean, obviously it's a real thing. I mean, it's a real thing here in New Jersey, let alone along the Mississippi or what have you. Yeah, so that hard infrastructure, levees, things like that. Except, yeah, we're just sort of accepting our stuff getting flooded. We have 4 houses, one pretty historic, well, I should say 4 buildings, 3 are pretty historic that flood like this. And we're sort of in the accept phase now of that. So they flood, we just sort of wipe them down afterwards, and they stand. They're elements on the landscape. Some of them are extremely beautiful. People don't live in them, right? And then what about the D, the direct here? Any ideas about the D? And think about it in like a built infrastructure standpoint. Like what would be a direct for the houses, like for these buildings that we have? What do you think? What would be a nice future state of these buildings? Detention basins, rain gardens. Well, this kind of flooding, that probably, maybe we did this like all over the state. I don't know. I mean, this is the highest crest ever, right? And that's important, definitely. So what we were thinking is, oh yeah, go ahead, sorry. Coastal management, yeah, coastal management can maybe help a little bit too. Relocation, yeah. So that's what we're thinking with some of our buildings. Now that's controversial, right? So we have a farmhouse from like 1860 or whatever that Doris Duke restored. Super cool house, and so we had 2 plans. One is to raise it, which made it look really weird because it's like a traditional farmhouse. Like it's on, like some of these things you see at the shore where they're up on stilts. And you're like, it's really architecturally awkward. And the other one was like relocating it to another place on the property. So we're just sort of considering. So the point is you can use this RAD concept, more broadly than just ecosystems. So yes. Oh, security camera. Yeah, great question. I was not in a canoe. Right? Were you there Friday? No. Okay. All right. Ben used to work for us, so as a ranger. Awesome. Okay. So now you have the concepts. Now for, I hope, the fun part. Quick question. You're all watershed experts. Raise your hand if you know about, know kind of generally land use, ecological issues, et cetera, about the lower Passaic River watershed. Does anyone know about the lower Passaic, kind of what? Yeah, just the Passaic River watershed, like in general. Yeah, Harriet. Okay, awesome. It's nice to see you, Harriet, by the way. Upper Raritan watershed. Okay. What's that? Your Upper Passaic? Close enough. Okay. So Harriet, you're going to be doing Lower Passaic. And what's your name? I'm sorry. Rob, you'll be doing Upper Raritan. Oh, what's that? You want to do up? Okay, yeah, well, we could do Upper Passaic. That's cool. Why don't we do Upper Passaic? And so when you see the slide come up, replace Raritan with Passaic. And then here's a tricky one, the Mullica River. Oh, you know that one too? Anyone know the Mullica River? Yeah, do you know? Okay, well, I'll help you out. Okay, you too? Okay. So what I want you to do is we're going to break into groups per watershed. And then remember, we're switching Raritan for Passaic here. And then I want you to identify specific watershed management challenges of this watershed in a changing climate. Discuss how you might apply this RAD approach. Identify pros and cons of each RAD strategy, and then prepare a summary. And for like 5 minutes, we'll sort of debrief afterwards. So it's an exercise for you to start thinking watershed scale, how you might apply this framework. So we can, why don't we count off, and then you can be assigned to sort of random watershed. So just count off by threes.
3, 1.
You're two. Okay. And then back there, you're two. Yep, you're two. And then, yep, and then, did I skip anyone? No. You two? Okay, I guess that, so I guess you're two. Okay, so, let's see, Lower Passaic is 1. So, that's Harriet, Upper Passaic, back there, Rob, and then Mullica River Watershed. Yeah, you too. So, if you could just rearrange yourselves per this, and we'll you know.
And John, for the
15, 20.
people at home, should they just think about their own watershed and
Yeah,
how they
why
would
don't
apply
the
it?
folks at home think about their own watershed, and then in the comment section or what have you, we'll read the comments and we can discuss a few. That'd be
Yeah,
great.
in the Q&A.
Yeah, Q&A,
Yeah.
sorry. Yep. So let's start with the most unusual watershed from New Jersey, the Mullica. Who's gonna be your sort of facilitator? Like, who wants to provide the summary of your discussion?
I'll say some words.
Okay, thank you.
Say anything that I missed, please jump in and we can all combine our thoughts together. So basically it's in the Pine Barrens, very close to the coast. Some of the challenges that we saw were, oh yes, here's the map. Are heavy storm events, also heavy pine barrens, so a lot of wildfires. Also saltwater incursions. So there's a lot of saltwater going into the groundwater and also into the surrounding areas. We also discussed ghost forests, which were past habitats of Atlantic white cedars. So and also other things that we mentioned were possible human interactions, ATVs, and other sources of disturbance in this site. How do we apply these RAD challenges? So resisting was trying to prevent all of these strategies. Accepting was, oh, just letting them be. It is what it is, and that's what's going to happen. And directing was we discussed a few of them in like a little bit of detail. So for direction, so like for wildfires, fires burning too hot, maybe having some prescribed burns to lessen the impact of the hot fires to direct that. For the saltwater incursion, I think you had an interesting idea about having some, can you remember what you mentioned?
Resist.
Yeah. So, okay, that was resist oriented. Very good.
Barriers to the salt moving in, but yeah.
Barriers to the salt moving in. There were some other things we discussed. I didn't write them down.
Planting more saltwater capable plants.
Yeah.
So directing by just adapting to areas where there's been saltwater intrusion by first accepting and then just planting species that can thrive in the soil that has a higher salinity.
Yeah, so you're directing it to a new ecosystem
Mhm.
state by using plants that are more resistant. Yep, that's great. So awesome. Well, thank you all. Any question? Anyone have any comments about what they said or questions? All right. The Molucca River watershed, that's where I grew up. That's why I picked it. Nice. All right, cool. So let's move on. Lower Passaic. Yes. Thank you for the people on Zoom.
Great. So, as many of you know, the Lower Passaic is a very urban, built-up environment, a lot of impervious cover. We will sometimes find solid waste along the banks and in the water, a lot of industrial uses adjacent to the waterway, issues with PCBs and historic contaminants, dioxin. More current contaminants are sediment and salts from the road. We kind of blended our resist and direct solutions or potential solutions. So we talked about increasing the stream buffer through green infrastructure and similar methods, rezoning and land use code changes, potentially reforesting yards with more deep-rooted plant species, maybe planting meadows instead of turf grass. Very briefly, we touched on Blue Acres and programs like Superfund and others to help with some of the cleanup. We talked very briefly about pros and cons. Pros of implementing some of these solutions are slowing water and increasing water quality parameters, and cons are the expense and just the heavy lift of educating the public about the benefits of these solutions. And we did get some guidance from John that you should think more about the resist parameter as maintaining the existing state. And we also, among ourselves, kind of talked about everything's a choice and you're trying to, balance what you do. And that even within these strategies, sometimes, you have to make decisions on what to keep and accept and what to try to resist and change.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that'll come down to funding and, whether the people want to do it.
Sheer people power,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, that was a super interesting point I think you had about the resist and direct. And I wonder if that's more like an issue in more urbanized watersheds too, where resisting is direct, like where those strategies kind of get mixed up a little bit, because I always think of these, it's much easier for me to think of them in more ecological, kind of, I wouldn't say more pristine environments, but, kind of more, less developed, less urban, more rural.
Right. Because it's already had so much change from what was there, centuries ago.
Yeah. It's interesting. Well, thank you. Any questions or comments for Harriet? Yeah, go ahead.
As far as the development in that, wait.
For our area, which is one of the least developed parts of the state, with climate change, we were talking about people moving inland to get away from coastal hazards. And a resist example there would be to prevent development so it doesn't get to the point in which you have in those northern, closer to the city watersheds we have.
Thank you. All right. Last but not least, Rob, got it? All right. Upper Passaic. Thank you.
Hi, we talked about the Upper Passaic, but it really, to John's point in the beginning, it probably applies to any headwater down area. So this is mostly a suburban area, not an urban area. And so a lot of these points have been made already. Actually, I was surprised to hear a lot of the points that were made in the prior comment that I would have thought were more suburban than urban, but I guess they apply everywhere. So, I mean, development's probably, we didn't talk about it in our group, but now that you said it, of course, that's probably the most, the thing we worry about the most in the upper headwaters. There was one the other day, the actual headwaters of the Passaic, and they were going to put a 10 house development right there. And I think that was successfully repulsed. But still, that was the number one. The other thing is, again, mentioned before, which is as these suburban properties that line the waterways, you have to be concerned about the water the quality of the water coming off of these properties into the river and degrading the water quality. So things like rain garden was mentioned as a direct, perhaps. Resist, I'm not sure what you could do except stasis, no development anywhere until, we just, everything's, that's accept as everything's exactly the same. But so development there was another interesting concept that came up about education. I know you weren't sure what to do with that in the beginning, but it still came up again. I think educating these people who are the property owners that along the river. I've also seen dam removal as a direction thing, and not the dams we think of, like that are 20 feet high, but there's lots of dams, if you're not familiar, that are like look like a ripple on the top of the water, and there's a ton of them. 2,000 dams in New Jersey, I think, something like that. And getting rid of those might restore fish habitat, get water quality better, riparian environments better. And again, to make all this happen, another interesting comment came up about a stormwater utility, perhaps some way to pay for this work. People wouldn't necessarily want to add a new tax or new levy or something like that. So if there was a fund that was dedicated to this, and maybe that would be a way to actually see these things through to fruition.
Yeah. Or else we're
anything
stuck with
else that I
accept
missed?
if you don't have the funding almost, right?
Right.
Yeah. So.
Team two, anything else that you think we should mention?
Also, in terms of stormwater management, another way to deal with like lawn runoff is rewilding the lawns. So the idea of not having the American lawn and just having a pollinator garden as a lawn, that reduces the runoff and it provides habitat for a lot of animals.
What would you consider that in the RAD? Would it be
A direct.
direct? Yeah, I
Yes.
would too. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, because I guess lawn is an ecosystem and you're directing it to a new ecosystem type by
Yeah.
doing it. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
I like that. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all. That was a great discussion. There was a quick question. So we have a few minutes left. I want to show you, I'm going to show you an AI tool that I made. So if you want to continue having this discussion with the computer, you can. And I'll show you how at the end. But before that, I wanted to talk a little bit about Duke Farms and sort of how we've applied it. All right, thank you. I can be in stereo here. So like I said, we're for about a year and a half, I've been working with natural resources at Duke Farms. And I had this plan. And so we had all these things we're doing. So we've been starting to categorize those things we're doing within the RAD concept. So with resist, the one big thing we do with resist at Duke Farms is we do deer management. So we're resisting overpopulation of deer. So we have a 640 acre deer exclosure where we have virtually no deer in it. And we have a very highly managed hunt that we do outside of the deer. So we're resisting that ecosystem change. We're not just accepting overabundant deer. And we have a whole monitoring program that we do, and we're doing multispectral drone work. Be happy to talk your ears off for a week about it. But that's one big thing that we put a lot of effort into is, as far as resistant Duke Farms. An example of an accept was that barberry forest. So we have areas that are completely overrun with invasives. And although we do have resources to do land management, we're we'd rather spend our resources doing something that's going to have more impact, right? So we do, with the invasive species, non-native invasive species, especially with privet and honeysuckle and barberry, there are certain areas where we've just said we're going to let it go. Now, the really cool thing is in one of these areas, the past month, we've had 2 bobcat sightings for the first time. So some of these areas you're it's just, but we're accepting that change, the fact that bobcats are coming back in these areas that are very invasive. So, there's a lot we don't know about it. So, and also, that relief and not having to spend resources on that. Now, as far as species go in non-native invasive species, we do have a resist strategy as well. And that's the early detection rapid response, right? And working with the New Jersey invasive species strike team. And the theory there is like you get on top of the new invasives that are going to turn into the new barberry or whatever. So we do have a resist strategy and an accept strategy when it relates to invasive species. And then one other example is a large 120-acre restoration we're doing on the floodplain. It was farmed since the Dutch, settled the area, so for hundreds of years. And we're directing that to a new ecosystem state to riparian forest. So it's 120-acre former ag area. We took out all the tile drains to restore wetlands function, and we're planting more southern species as well, and southern genotypes. So we're directing this to a new ecosystem type with new species. It was agricultural land, warm season grasses for a while. Now we're directing it to forest. So we're using direct as well. So those are examples there. And then the final thing, because I am a geek and you guys have to know this before I leave, is another tool you can use. So I passed out this. Like I said, download the papers before they're gone, because some of them, then there's a National Park Service website that was up as of this morning, related all to RAD, if you're interested in more in doing that. And then I created this this biodiversity manager, GPT it's called, or AI agent or whatever, that you can just kind of ask questions. So, and then it'll come back with kind of a RAD framework. So if you're like struggling with this, and are interested in like talking with something that, something that can respond and maybe iterate, this is a really cool tool. And I can demonstrate real quick. Yeah, check the Zoom question and answer. Okay, how do I do that?
Thank you, Anna. I will do it.
All right. So there may be some questions as we do this. I am just going to bring this up. So this may come off of Zoom. Just warning you, but you can use this QR code for those folks on Zoom to do the biodiversity manager. Just want to demonstrate it real quick for you.
Can I just ask you the Zoom question first?
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Is RAD more a strategy for the team working with the public, or do you share it with the public and work through it together?
That's a great question. So RAD typically is like a public, depends how nerdy the public is, right? But yeah, it is a way to really describe these changes and get these ecological changes out that, get people